In the long, humid days of the summer of 1965, 6 teenage boys from the remote island kingdom of Tonga made a choice that would forever change their lives. Tired of the rigid discipline and predictable routines of their strict Catholic boarding school, St. Andrew's College, the boys found themselves longing for something more. Their hearts ached for adventure, something wild, unplanned, something that would break the monotonous cycle of school life. Tonga, with its warm tropical waters, coral islands, and breathtaking beauty, was their home, but the world beyond its shores called to them with promises of excitement and freedom. Among them was 16-year-old Sione Fatawa, a natural leader with a rebellious streak. He was joined by 5 close friends: Mano, Kolo, Stephen, Luke, and David, the youngest of the group at just 13 years old. Together they conceived a bold, almost reckless plan to steal a small fishing boat and set sail for distant lands like Fiji or New Zealand. The goal wasn't so much a destination, but the sheer act of escape. Their preparation, like their plan, was far from thorough. Driven more by youthful energy than careful planning, they packed only 2 sacks of bananas, a few coconuts, and a single gas burner. There was no navigation equipment, no map, no compass, and very little understanding of how to sail across open ocean. But to the boys these details were minor. The thrill of rebellion overshadowed any fear. So, under the cover of darkness, with hearts pounding and laughter bubbling from their chests, they slipped away from Tonga's familiar shores. Their boat glided silently over the water, carrying them into the unknown. For the first time they felt truly alive. The world stretched out endlessly before them, and the wind felt like freedom against their skin. But the Pacific Ocean is a vast and unforgiving place. That very night, as they sailed farther from home, nature turned against them. A violent storm roared across the sea, tossing their small boat like a toy in a bathtub. Waves crashed over the sides, drenching them and soaking their supplies. The rudder snapped off, leaving them unable to steer. The sail, their only means of propulsion, was torn to shreds by the howling wind. What had begun as a grand adventure descended into chaos. The boys clung to their damaged vessel as it drifted aimlessly, their laughter replaced by shouts of fear and confusion. They had no way to call for help, no means to navigate, and no choice but to surrender to the mercy of the sea. For 8 endless days, they floated in the open ocean, baking under the relentless sun by day and shivering in the cold at night. Hunger gnawed at their bellies. Their bananas and coconuts were quickly consumed, and efforts to catch fish proved fruitless. Thirst became their greatest enemy as their bodies began to weaken from dehydration. With each passing day their hope dwindled. They scanned the horizon endlessly, praying to see the outline of land or the silhouette of a passing ship. But the ocean offered no salvation, only silence and endless blue. It was a test of spirit, endurance, and willpower that most adults would struggle to survive. Yet these boys, still in their teens, held on. Then, when they were at the edge of despair, a miracle appeared. On the horizon, barely visible through the heat haze, was land. A small, rocky island, uninhabited, wild, and unknown. With the last of their energy, they steered the crippled boat toward it, finally dragging themselves ashore, weak and sunburned but alive. They had survived the sea. But their journey was far from over. What they didn't know was that this isolated piece of land, Ada Island, would become their new home, not just for a few days or weeks, but for the next 15 months. They were marooned, completely cut off from the outside world. Life on the island became a different kind of struggle. They quickly realized that no rescue was coming anytime soon. But instead of descending into chaos, the boys organized themselves. They built huts using palm fronds and tree branches. They fashioned tools from the wreckage and debris they found. They created a way to harvest and store rainwater. They hunted birds, fished in the surrounding waters, and even planted a garden. They established a rotating schedule of duties, dividing labor evenly among themselves to ensure everyone had a role. When arguments arose, they settled them peacefully. When one of them broke a leg, the others carefully nursed him back to health. Through it all, they relied not just on their survival instincts, but on deep friendship, teamwork, and trust. Day after day, the boys endured, through storms, through hunger, through the loneliness of being forgotten by the world. And somehow they not only survived, they thrived. They turned an uninhabited island into a small, functioning society. It was not just a story of survival, but of human resilience at its purest. These 6 boys, once driven by boredom and rebellion, had become something more: builders, caretakers, brothers. This is not just a tale of castaways. It's a testament to what young people are capable of when they're united by a common goal and driven by hope. In a world where so many survival stories end in tragedy, there stands out as a rare and powerful reminder of the strength that lies within the human spirit. This is the astonishing true story of the Tongan teen castaways, 6 boys who went searching for freedom and found something far greater. As the boys neared the island of Ada, a fleeting sense of relief washed over them, only to be swiftly replaced by the crushing reality of the perilous situation they faced. The treacherous currents that had dragged their battered boat toward the island seemed to have one final cruel twist in store for them. The boat, already damaged from the violent storms and rough seas they had endured, was slammed mercilessly against the jagged rocks lining the shore. The hull, weakened and splintered from days of relentless strain, could not withstand the assault. In an instant, the boat was destroyed and the boys were thrown into the churning, violent sea. The water, cold and unforgiving, battered them with waves that seemed determined to drag them under. Bruised, bleeding, and with their strength failing, they fought desperately against the tides, each stroke feeling like an eternity. The fierce currents dragged at them, pulling them farther away from the shore. Yet somehow, by some miracle, they managed to reach the beach, exhausted and gasping for air. The relief they felt at being alive was quickly overshadowed by the harsh reality that awaited them. They had survived the sea, but now they were stranded on an unforgiving island, with no idea what lay ahead. The island they found themselves on was a far cry from any tropical paradise. There were no palm trees swaying gently in the breeze, no white sandy beaches to rest upon, and no lush vegetation offering respite. Instead, the island presented a landscape that was as hostile as it was beautiful. Jagged cliffs rose steeply from the shore, creating a seemingly impenetrable barrier between the boys and any hope of escape. The dense jungle that stretched before them seemed almost alive with hidden dangers, its thick undergrowth making progress slow and treacherous. The terrain was rugged and unforgiving, with sharp rocks and uneven ground making each step a challenge. There was no fresh water to be found, no streams or springs to quench their thirst. The boys searched desperately, hoping for some sign of life, but all they found was the harsh silence of a place untouched by civilization. It quickly became apparent that the island was not a refuge, but a battleground, one where their survival would depend on their wits, their strength, and their resolve. With no shelter or resources to speak of, the boys sought refuge in a small cave along the shore. The cave, cold and damp, provided them with some minimal protection from the harsh elements, but it offered little comfort. As the nights grew colder and more uncomfortable, they huddled together for warmth, trying to stave off the constant gnawing hunger that seemed to consume them. Days passed and their situation grew increasingly dire. The island's jungle, which seemed so full of potential in the beginning, offered little in terms of food or water. Every day the boys ventured deeper into the dense forest, hoping to find anything that could sustain them. But the jungle was relentless, offering nothing but thick vines, thorny bushes, and an overwhelming sense of isolation. Their spirits began to flag, their bodies weakened by hunger and exhaustion. The initial hope that they had clung to was beginning to slip away, and with it, their will to survive seemed to waver. Each passing day without food or water made their situation more desperate, and the prospect of death began to feel all too real. It seemed as though the island was determined to break them, to wear them down until there was nothing left. But just when all hope seemed lost, the island presented them with an unexpected lifeline. It was during one of their desperate searches for food that the boys stumbled upon something they never could have anticipated: the remains of an ancient village long abandoned by the island's former inhabitants. Hidden deep within the jungle, the village's ruins had been swallowed by time and the relentless growth of the forest, but traces of it still remained. The boys could hardly believe their eyes as they stumbled through the overgrown paths, discovering wild banana trees heavy with fruit, their leaves rustling in the breeze. Taro plants, their roots hidden beneath the earth, promised nourishment if they could dig them up. Even a few chickens, descendants of the island's original inhabitants, wandered through the village, providing a much-needed source of protein. It was a small but significant breakthrough, a discovery that gave them a glimmer of hope in the midst of their struggle. For the first time in days, they dared to believe that survival was possible. However, the discovery of the ancient village did not mean that their troubles were over. The boys quickly realized that surviving on the island would not be as simple as finding food and shelter. They would have to learn to live off the land, adapting to the harsh environment that surrounded them. The island was not a place of comfort, and survival would demand much more than just a stroke of luck. It would require every bit of their determination, every ounce of their resourcefulness, and an unbreakable will to keep going, even when everything seemed stacked against them. The days ahead would be filled with challenges, and there would be times when they would question whether they had the strength to continue. But in that moment, as they stood amidst the ruins of the ancient village, they knew one thing for certain: they had been given a fighting chance. And that, perhaps, was all they needed to survive. Surviving on Atta Island was a test of endurance, resilience, and ingenuity. When the boys discovered the abandoned village, it was as if a spark of hope had been reignited in their hearts. They now had access to food sources, which lifted their spirits and gave them a renewed sense of purpose. However, the harsh realities of the island soon became evident. Survival here would require much more than hope. It would demand strict discipline, careful planning, and above all, teamwork. Sunwon and Steven, the natural leaders of the group, stepped up to organize the boys, dividing them into pairs, each group responsible for different vital tasks. This structure brought a sense of order to the chaos that was their new life. Two of the boys dedicated themselves to tending to the garden, a crucial task that involved cultivating the wild taro and banana trees they had found. These plants were their lifeline to food, and they nurtured them with the utmost care. Another pair took on the responsibilities of foraging for other edible plants and hunting seabirds, which they managed to catch with traps and makeshift tools. The last pair was in charge of capturing and looking after the wild chickens they had discovered on the island. They built makeshift pens from whatever materials they could find, setting traps to catch more wild birds to sustain their growing needs. Despite their best efforts to secure food, water continued to be the biggest challenge. The island, isolated and barren, offered no natural springs and rainfall was rare. The boys used their resourcefulness to solve this problem, fashioning reservoirs from hollowed-out tree trunks to collect every drop of rainwater that fell from the sky. When the rains didn't come, they resorted to drinking the blood of seabirds to stay hydrated, an extreme but necessary tactic that kept them alive. Their next breakthrough came when they figured out how to create fire. They used sticks from the sea hibiscus wood, rubbing and twisting them together until finally, a spark ignited. Fire, something so ordinary in the world they once knew, became their most cherished possession on the island. It provided warmth against the cool nights, a means to cook their food, and most importantly, a way to signal for help if any ships ever passed by. They were relentless in guarding the fire, ensuring it never went out, day or night. But even with fire, the island remained unforgiving. One fateful day, Steven, while hunting for food, slipped and broke his leg. In the face of this setback, the boys rallied around their injured friend. They quickly fashioned splints from branches and strips of cloth, doing everything they could to stabilize his injury. For weeks, they cared for Steven, taking on his share of work, ensuring he stayed as comfortable as possible, and offering him support as he slowly healed. Despite the growing weight of their struggles, the boys found solace in their bond and their shared goal of survival. Through all the hardship, they never lost sight of the importance of keeping their spirits high. They turned to prayer, music, and storytelling to lift their hearts and ease the mental strain of their situation. Ku, ever the resourceful one, crafted a guitar from driftwood and a coconut shell. The sound of music, even in the harshest of circumstances, became a powerful tool for them to escape the brutal reality of island life, offering them moments of comfort and peace. But there was one challenge that continued to haunt them: the waiting. Each day they would scan the horizon, hoping for a ship to appear, yet it always seemed a distant dream. Despite building large signal fires and maintaining an unwavering sense of hope, the boys couldn't shake the feeling that rescue was an elusive vision that was always just out of reach. The days stretched on, and with every passing moment, the belief that they might be rescued someday felt more and more like a fleeting fantasy. The boys had learned to adapt to the grueling realities of island life, but despite their efforts, survival remained an ongoing battle. The island's isolation weighed heavily on them, stripping away any semblance of comfort or ease. Nature itself seemed to be their constant adversary. The storms, violent and unrelenting, battered their camp with terrifying frequency. With each storm that swept across the island, the boys found their shelters, which had been hard-earned and carefully constructed, damaged or completely destroyed. Their gardens, the cornerstone of their food supply, were repeatedly flooded, leaving them without essential resources. It was a vicious cycle, one in which the storms continually stripped away their efforts and left them feeling powerless against the wrath of nature. Most terrifying of all was the constant threat to their fire, a symbol of hope and survival. On more than one occasion, they watched in dread as the flames flickered dangerously, nearly extinguished by the fierce winds and relentless rain. That fire was their lifeline, their only means of warmth, cooking, and even signaling for rescue. The prospect of losing it was a fear that gnawed at their every thought. But physical challenges were not the only obstacles they faced. The emotional toll of island life was beginning to take its toll. slowly eroding the boys' spirits. The pressures of survival, ever mounting and unyielding, began to manifest in heated arguments and growing tensions between them. The isolation was a silent but insidious force that made their bond more fragile each day. The boys, once unified by their shared purpose, found themselves at odds, with frustration bubbling to the surface at the slightest provocation. Even though they had devised a system for managing conflicts, taking time apart to cool off and regain composure, the strain of constant survival made it harder to maintain peace. The emotional fatigue weighed heavily on their minds, and there were days when it seemed as though their unity was hanging by a thread. The thought that the group might fracture and splinter under the stress of isolation was a looming fear. What would happen if they couldn't hold it together? Would they fall apart, each boy left to fend for himself in a world that seemed increasingly hostile and unforgiving? Their physical resources too were rapidly dwindling. The chickens they had so carefully nurtured were lost to the storms, their fragile lives snatched away in an instant by the fury of the elements. Food, once a relatively simple concern, became more and more scarce. Each day that passed seemed to bring with it new challenges. The hunt for food grew longer, and the island's bounty seemed to slip further out of reach. The boys' once hopeful view of the island as a place of opportunity and potential had been replaced by the harsh reality that it was a dangerous and unpredictable environment. The island seemed to have turned against them, a relentless force testing their ability to survive, both physically and emotionally. Every day was a struggle, and every night was fraught with uncertainty. As their food stores dwindled and their energy reserves grew thinner, the boys realized that every moment on the island was a test of endurance, a battle to maintain their strength in the face of ever-mounting adversity. The weight of their circumstances grew heavier and heavier, each passing week seeming to add more pressure, more strain to their already fragile spirits. Yet, despite all of this, despite the storms, the conflicts, and the dwindling resources, the boys never lost sight of one thing: hope. It was the one thing that refused to die, even in the darkest of times. They held on to the belief that one day somehow they would be rescued. They continued their vigil on the lookout, scanning the horizon for any sign of a ship or plane that might come to their aid. Each passing day without rescue only deepened their resolve to keep fighting, to keep surviving. The fire, their symbol of hope, was tended to with the utmost care, its flames a constant reminder that as long as it burned, there was a chance, a possibility that they could one day return to the world they had once known. Through the storms, the physical exhaustion, and the emotional strain, the boys refused to give up. They clung to the hope that rescue was not just a distant dream but a real possibility, a promise that one day they would find their way back home. Nearly 15 months of struggle, isolation, and survival had tested the boys beyond what most could even imagine. Yet, through it all, their faith and determination never faltered. They fought against the crushing challenges of hunger, exhaustion, and the relentless elements, believing that somehow, someway their ordeal would eventually end. And then, one fateful day, their perseverance was rewarded in the most miraculous of ways. Australian fisherman Peter Warner, on a routine trip through the waters surrounding the island, happened to notice something unusual on the horizon, a faint column of smoke rising from the desolate shore. His curiosity piqued, Warner steered his boat closer to investigate, never suspecting what he would find. As he neared the island, his eyes grew wide in disbelief as he saw 6 boys, once thought to be lost forever, emerging from the jungle, rushing toward the water's edge. They were battered, their clothes tattered and their bodies weathered by the harsh conditions of their prolonged survival, but they were unmistakably alive. Warner could scarcely comprehend what he was witnessing. It was a sight that defied reason, but he knew immediately that he had to act fast. Without hesitation, he radioed Tonga with the astonishing news: these 6 boys, presumed dead for so long, had somehow survived. The response from Tonga was a mixture of shock and overwhelming joy. The news spread rapidly, filling people with disbelief, hope, and a sense of wonder. The boys had been declared dead long ago, their funerals held, their families devastated by their loss. But now, miraculously, they were alive, defying the impossible. The families who had mourned them could hardly believe what they were hearing. The sense of loss that had consumed them for over a year was suddenly replaced with an unimaginable rush of relief and joy. The boys, once thought to be lost to the world forever, were coming home. When Warner's boat eventually returned to Tonga, it was not just a homecoming, it was a moment of triumph. The boys were greeted as heroes, their remarkable survival story becoming a beacon of hope for people across the globe. Their tale of endurance against impossible odds captivated the world's attention, drawing admiration and awe from all corners. The boys had not just survived, They had done so through an extraordinary display of resilience, teamwork, and ingenuity. They had faced every challenge thrown their way, relying on one another for support, and proving that even in the darkest of circumstances, the human spirit can shine through. Their story became a symbol of hope, a reminder that the strength to overcome adversity resides in each of us, no matter how dire the situation may seem. However, the ordeal left its marks both physically and emotionally. The scars of their long and harrowing struggle would never fully fade. Yet in many ways the boys returned stronger than ever. Their bond had been forged in the crucible of survival, and it was a bond that nothing could ever break. Their unshakable friendship had carried them through the most unimaginable challenges, and it would continue to be a source of strength for them throughout their lives. The experience had changed them forever, but it had also empowered them. They were no longer just survivors, they were living proof of the power of the human will to endure, adapt, and overcome. Their story remains one of the greatest real-life survival tales ever told, an enduring testament to the power of friendship, resourcefulness, and the indomitable will to survive. It is a story that continues to inspire and move people to this day, a story that reminds us all of the extraordinary things we are capable of when we refuse to give up, no matter the odds. If you found today's story inspiring, we encourage you to explore more incredible tales of human resilience and survival here on our channel. Until next time, stay curious, stay strong, and never forget that the human spirit is capable of unimaginable things.